Well, good morning, everybody. This is Pastor Jay, and I'm coming to you from the Bonnet Creek Resort in Florida. And I am here at General Council and National Youth Convention with Pastor Amanda and the Hackett family. And today, as the day begins, we are doing our Digging Deeper devotional right here from Florida. We're continuing on with these devotions, and we're continuing to talk about our sermon series, Living the Dream, and this is week number 3 in that. This is actually the 16th devotional in this series, and we are speaking from our congregational sentence, which is, awakened and empowered by love, we will transform our communities. And there are 3 words that we're really discussing, or we've been discussing over the last 15 days of devotionals, and that is the word awakened, the word empowered, and the word transformed. We say that as we are awakened and as we are empowered, we will be transformed, and so will our communities be. In order to talk about this, we've been using Ephesians 5 and Ephesians 6 primarily. We have talked about being awakened and being empowered, and now we are on the topic of being transformed and transforming our communities. How are we to be transformed, and how are we to transform our communities? Well, in Romans 12, verse 2, Paul tells us that transformation comes when we renew or change our minds. And then, how do we change our minds? And Ephesians 6 tells us that our minds get transformed or changed, or our lives get transformed or changed. In fact, the community around us gets transformed and changed when we put on the full armor of God. And I would put to you that putting on the armor of God requires us to change things in our thinking. So we looked yesterday at the idea of putting on the belt of truth and how that requires us to leave behind the lies that we've been taught to think, the lying ways we've been taught to think about the world around us, and begin to embrace truth ways or scriptural ways of thinking about the world around us and the kingdom of God. And I gave an example yesterday of how the Bible, thinking biblically about money, transforms the way we look at money and the way we use money. And that changes the world. When we change how we look at money and how we use money, that changes not just us, but it changes the world around us. And so today we're moving on to talk about the breastplate of righteousness. In Ephesians 6:13, Paul the Apostle goes on to say, 6:14, he says, put on the body armor of God's righteousness. Righteousness is like a breastplate that protects our heart. And so when we begin to shift our thinking about behavior, then we begin to shift the world around us. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 6, I believe it is. Matthew chapter 5, verse 6, yes. Jesus says, "Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled." What does it mean to hunger and thirst after righteousness? Well, the word hunger is the word penao, and it means to suffer want, to be needy for, to need desperately, to crave ardently. And so when we begin to crave righteousness as a way of life and as a way of life that we are going to pursue, we will be filled, right? We will be filled. When we penao righteousness, when we become needy for righteousness, when we need our behavior to be right before God, we will be filled. Listen to some of these verses from the Bible. Proverbs 21:21 says, "He who follows or pursues righteousness and mercy finds life, righteousness, and honor." We find life, righteousness, and honor. As we begin to pursue these things, we will have life, right? Righteousness and honor. Psalm 11:7 says, "For the Lord is righteous. He loves righteousness. The upright will behold his face." Matthew 5:10 says, "Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." We bring heaven into play when we are persecuted or mistreated for righteousness' sake. So as we begin to think righteously, as we begin to crave righteousness as a way of life, as we begin to pray for righteousness to be established in our lives, because Romans 1:17 says, "For in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith." You see, when we begin to crave righteousness and righteous behavior, we begin to realize we can't change ourselves, and so we have to go to God for it. And God begins to pour his righteousness into our lives. And when he pours righteousness into our lives, we begin to behave righteously. And when we begin to behave righteously, it shifts the world around us into a more righteous world. Not because we're forcing people to conform to the will of God, but because when we treat people with goodness and kindness and love, the world around us becomes a better place. All right, so I'm going to finish here with that thought and leave you to think about it. And until we meet again, God bless you and be at peace.